Hi, everyone, first of all, and welcome to our workshop on Imposter Syndrome. And thank you once again for signing up. Before we begin, we'd like to tell you a little bit about ourselves. So we're all medical students at the University of Birmingham, and we're representing Birmingham Medical Leadership Society. It's one of the few medical leadership societies in the country that's actively promoting leadership promoting leadership in healthcare to students. In terms of introducing our speakers, I'll go first. My name is Shihab. I just finished first year in medicine at Birmingham. I'm also an international student coming from Bangladesh. That's where I am right now. And in terms of my interests, I'm passionate about medical education as well as leadership.
Hi, so I'm Holly. I'm actually the agenda lead for this conference, and I'm just about to start my third year at University of Birmingham. And as it says, I'm really interested in surgical training. Yeah.
And hi everyone, my name's Haroon. I'm a final year medical student again at the University of Birmingham. I'm passionate about leadership. I'm the president of the society, Birmingham Medical Leadership Society, and I've just finished my an integrated degree in a year out of medicine to do a degree in healthcare management and leadership.
So we were also supposed to have Maiar with us. Hopefully she can be with us in a few moments. She's also a second-year medic, and as it says, she's involved in numerous societies, does lots of things, and yeah. So I'll just run you through quickly today's outline. We're going to start by learning what imposter syndrome really is, and then we'll discuss why it's especially relevant to young adults. And after that, we'll have an interactive session where you can find out for yourselves if you have an imposter syndrome anonymously. And then finally, we'll look at some practical strategies as to how we can manage imposter syndrome.
Can you see me? Can you see and hear me?
Has Maiar joined with us yet?
Yeah,
Harry, I'm so sorry about that. I have no clue what happened.
That's fine. Cool. We sort of introduced you in the slide above anyway. So it's probably a good idea if we just get going with the talk.
Okay, so we're going to begin by introducing imposter syndrome, and as in what is imposter syndrome. So in many challenges and opportunities that we face, we are often held back by what we know to be our weaknesses. These form the inner thoughts that we are just not good enough, and that someone like us can't possibly be successful in in whatever it is we're trying to overcome or whatever it is we're applying. And hence, we tend to think that other people are more deserving of these opportunities. We feel like we are imposters, and this phenomenon is known as the imposter phenomenon or the imposter experience, but most commonly referred to as the imposter syndrome, which is the title of our presentation. This is further escalated by the unreal picture of what other people are like. We fail to imagine how flawed other people are beneath a perfect appearance that they draw to the world. We don't know how hard others work. We don't know the challenges they face. We don't know what their struggles are. We don't know their insecurities. This is connected to another phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance, where we doubt ourselves, but think that we are the only ones who are doing so. Okay. Also, people in general tend to know themselves quite well from the inside, while others from the outside. So we're often aware of our own anxieties, doubts, insecurities, idiocies. While this is not the case when it comes to other people. We tend to only be able to see what they share with us or what we know through social media. However, this tends to be a positive image. Because, for example, how many of us will tend to share that they've been rejected rather than they've been accepted? How many of us will tend to share that they've lost a competition rather than won an award? See, that's the image. It's called the public image. And it tends to be positive, but that public image is tailored by the individual, and it fails to capture everything that's beyond that picture. For instance, the very famous scientist Albert Einstein, despite his very well-known accomplishments, often described himself as an involuntary swindler, and he said that he thought his work didn't deserve as much attention as he got. So while his accomplishments are undoubtedly very great in many fields, he still tended to have that feeling that many of us share, feelings of fraudulence and feelings of not fitting in. Psychologist Pauline Clance first studied this, and he noticed it in his undergraduate patients, who despite getting really high grades, thought that they did not deserve the spots that they received at their universities. Nevertheless, she did remember that she felt the same way. With colleague Susan Imes, she studied this issue in female college students and faculty. And after their study, it has been established that this is not only a phenomenon in female college students, but rather it's across the other gender and is also faced across different races and occupations. Nevertheless, it's more prevalent in underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. Susan Imes and Pauline Rose Clance described this syndrome in 1978 as occurring in high-achieving female women, and then shortly clarified that it was not just specific to women, and if anything, it tended to affect men even more under pressure. So, just as a general recap, it's a series of feelings and of insufficiencies and imperfections that, despite evidences of success and incompetency, one feels. Please move on. So we're going to briefly touch into imposter syndrome in healthcare, and this is going to be divided into 3 parts. First part is before medical school, when you're applying. You're still in school, in 6th form, 12th grade, whichever you'd want to call it, and you're applying amongst other applicants. Secondly is when you're in medical school as a medical student. And finally, when you graduate medical school and become a doctor or a professional. Before medical school, you might feel less intelligent and less competent than others. You might feel that other applicants are worthy of these limited seats in medical school than yourself. You become quite overwhelmed, and then you always underestimate the strength of your application compared to that of others. However, bear in mind that this happens even when you get the acceptance. You think, oh, did I actually deserve that seat? Was it not an error? Which is similar to what Pauline's patients have faced. Bear in mind that this happens when you're accepted. So can you imagine how the syndrome might feel like when you're getting rejected? And now, during medical school. During medical school, according to the International Journal of Medical Educational Studies, 50% of female medical students experienced imposter syndrome in comparison to the male students. It's associated with characteristics of burnouts and emotional exhaustion, as well as depression. This will definitely not only affect the person in terms of mental health, but will definitely affect them later on as they pursue their studies and continue. Once a smart student who's often distinguished between your classmates, which is sort of what helps you get into medical school, you become joined by other people with similar accomplishments, similar degrees of academic and social excellence. So then you start to doubt your abilities, doubt if you're good enough, doubt if you're as good as the people around you. And finally, after medical school. After medical school, this might affect the doctor's confidence in terms of his competence and his ability to deal with his patients. This affects his consultations with his patients, and this affects his relationship with his patients. It has also been shown to result in unnecessary referrals to other personalities, as the doctor tends to doubt their own diagnosis. And finally, in all of these specific stages, before them and after them as well, this can limit a person's drive to pursue residencies, fellowships, and promotions, and can also limit them from taking opportunities while others take them instead. This is because they think that they will definitely not be selected because they view others to be of the same, if not of higher, degree of proficiency than them.
Right. Thank you, Maiar. So for my talk, I wanted to start by telling you a little story. And for some context, as you've heard, I'm part of BMLS, and Haroon, who's going to be delivering the final segment of today's workshop, is our president. So 2 weeks ago, Haroon messaged us saying that there's an opportunity he would like the 4 of us from committee to get involved in. Now, the opportunity was about delivering a workshop at a national conference. Now, I still haven't begun second year, so I still considered myself first year. And as a first year medic, the first thing that came to my mind was, how could a first year medic possibly deliver a workshop at a conference to an audience that's potentially much older, wiser, more experienced and accomplished, that too at a conference where there's other older year medics, doctors, consultants, and even experienced nurses delivering similar workshops. Now, thankfully, before I could drown myself further in these thoughts, Haroon said something else. He said that the first 2 people to sign up would get selected automatically. And that acted as sort of a trigger And I just convinced myself to go for it, to see how it goes, to put myself out there and see if I can learn anything from the opportunity. And as a result of all of that, I'm here today addressing all of you. Now, had I not actively convinced myself to take the opportunity, I probably wouldn't have responded that quick to Haroon's message. There would be thousands of questions in my mind and never-ending self-doubt. In other words, the very moment that I was presented with this very opportunity, I experienced signs of imposter syndrome. I convinced myself that I didn't deserve the opportunity. I doubted my abilities to take part in it, and I was afraid I would be exposed as a fraud when people found out my lack of experience. And that's what I'm here to discuss today. This is something most young adults, whether they're in A-levels or starting out university, will face in particular. So I wanted to focus on how imposter syndrome can manifest, especially in those early on in their academic and professional lives. I'll be talking about the effects this can have on students in general, even outside of healthcare, and then we'll move on to how we can address this issue from an early age and why that would be beneficial for us in the long run. And lastly, introduce the concept of resilience as a coping mechanism. But why even talk about this at an early age in the first place? A literature review done on the studies related to imposter syndrome found out that half of the studies which met their review criteria were conducted on student populations with a weighted average age of 20 years old. Two of these studies also compared imposter syndrome with age, and they found out that imposter syndrome presented most severely at an early stage, which is likely to be when starting out at university or entering the professional sector. And there are some obvious reasons as to why it manifests around this period. When starting out at university, students from various schools and socioeconomic backgrounds all across the country and even the world will meet at one particular university and face a very different situation than their previous school. Suddenly, your peers are of similar academic standing to you and have accomplished impressive feats that you may not have been even aware of. Now, it's very easy to start comparing with others and lose self-confidence and feel out of place. And this was a common theme in 20 different interviews that was conducted and published by the Journal of Vocational Behavior. One of these students from these interviews even questioned her admission into the undergraduate program and said she must have slipped through the cracks, a mostly irrational fear that surprisingly a lot of us students will relate to. Now, this is even more relevant in healthcare degrees such as medicine, where entry requirements are competitive, like more competitive than in general, and students have stellar academic records and dazzling extracurriculars. There's also evidence that the overuse of social media by our generation contributes in setting unrealistic standards to compare to. Something that we have to remember is we get to see the highlight reels of others on social media and compare those to our own lives bloopers, and that's what leads us to feeling inferior. Okay, so we understand that imposter syndrome is common in young adults, but what's the big deal? Well, think about the times you've second-guessed yourself, the times you were completely sure you didn't deserve an opportunity or that you weren't cut out for example, that essay competition or a student election or even a whole degree that you shied away from. Chances are that you may have been wrong. With imposter syndrome, our minds get very good at convincing ourselves of our inadequacies, but very bad at reaffirming our strengths. This can lead to missed opportunities as well as settling for something less which we think we deserve, when in reality we could have strived for a lot more. Even as medical students, as Maiar said in the first segment, imposter syndrome can have significant effects. The evidence there was found from analyzing 40 book-length memoirs in which imposter syndrome was a common theme, and it led to burnout, social isolation, as well as emotional exhaustion. But it doesn't just stop at that. These are some famous people who suffered from imposter syndrome, and this is what they had to say. What we learn from here is that there is no threshold of accomplishment that can put these feelings to rest. And so it only makes sense that we learn from a very early stage some skills that we can use to tackle imposter syndrome, which can potentially stay with us forever. And one of those very broad skills, but very important, would be resilience. Now, a 2015 study concluded that there's a significant negative and inverse relationship between imposter syndrome and resiliency. So the more resilient you are, the less your chances of being victim to imposter syndrome. Resiliency, as it says on the slides, is the ability to bounce back, recover, and rebound from adversity. It's an ongoing and dynamic process of coping. It can be used to break something called the cycle of perceived inadequacy. Instead of dwelling over our mistakes and comparing them with other successes, we choose to learn from those mistakes instead. And in our early years as students, resiliency can be formed through a number of things. It can be formed through things like nurturing a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset, where we believe that our talents and our abilities can be improved through effort and persistence, and they're not limited to what we started off with initially. We can appreciate and ask for feedback to identify any misalignment in how we perceive ourselves and how others perceive us. We can learn to accept compliments and recognize both strengths and weaknesses in ourselves. We can communicate effectively so we can confirm how universal this feeling is and that we're not alone in feeling this way. As students, we can get involved in university societies or wherever our passions lie, push ourselves to embrace opportunities and share our ideas with everyone and have high ambitions. Now, this is just a rough overview of where we can start. In the following segments, we'll see how we'll dive deeper into how we can identify if we have imposter syndrome and then learn to manage it. That will be it for me. I'm gonna pass it over to Holly now.
Sorry, I've just got to reply to 2 messages quickly. The joys of hosting a workshop and helping run this. Okay, we're all good. So the next obvious step for us to do would be for people to do a quick self-assessment to see whether or not they show signs of having imposter syndrome. So to get up this quiz, it should only take about 3 minutes. People can either scan the QR code or type in the tiny URL. And yeah, if people could drop a comment in the chat when they're finished, that would be great. Also, thank you for all the really positive feedback, guys. I know that as a society, we all felt that it was a under-discussed topic, and it isn't something that is mentioned a lot. And especially on a degree which is known to be so competitive, and actually to do with the deciles and ranking system, in some ways that competitive nature is amplified and kind of encouraged. I know all of us think that it's really important that we discuss this a bit more. So yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting. Sorry, you go.
Put it on select, it's fine, don't worry.
I was just going to say that's a really interesting comment to bring up. Haroon's going to go through some more of the impacts of imposter syndrome, and we're going to go through about how to counter it. But more commonly, it's to do with underestimation and a lack of confidence in self. So yeah, once again, if people have done the quiz and have finished it, then if they could let me know, that would be great, because then I can go through.
You just figure what I was about to say. I think it'll be fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ramsha. Okay, I'm going to give it another minute or so, and then, in fact, actually, we'll just go for it. If I could have the next slide, please, Shihab. So dealing with imposter syndrome can be really challenging because it's something where there isn't necessarily an easy answer. Like many negative thought processes, in order to start to counter it, there has to be a really active process of trying to reconfigure how you feel about yourself and your achievements. because without that, the vicious cycle. If we could go across. Can we swap slides, please? So before we discuss all therapies, we're just going to do a quick recap about what we've done. So can I have next slide, please, Shihab? So we've briefly discussed what imposter syndrome is and how it is an incredibly complex set of emotions that is heightened by the fact that we tend to only consider the positives of other people that we see, because actually you don't always see the negatives. It's really common in healthcare professionals and young adults, and medical students are particularly affected by it as a condition, which, and I mean, given the comments on the chat, that it's a concept that seems to resonate with a lot of you. So next one. We had a brief look into the importance of resilience when learning how to sort of manage these emotions, and the idea that actually, even though you're feeling these, it's not necessarily what is actually happening. And we've done the quick quiz into imposter syndrome. So now we can sort of start to look at how to tackle it. And one of the biggest, like the most popular method for tackling it is something called ACT. Shihab. So ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy. It's, as it sort of suggests, it is a form of therapy that is based on mindfulness and the active challenging of the emotions that you are feeling. It's an evidence-based medicine technique, which is really key because, as we know, evidence-based medicine is the way forward. Next slide, please. So one of the key things that you have to think about emotions and how you're feeling is that it's kind of like quicksand. So you're getting these emotions, you're feeling them, and the more you fight against them, often the more they start to consume you and how you're feeling about them yourself, which is where you can bring in an idea called the struggle switch. So if your struggle switch is on, then you're battling all of these emotions that you're having to do with the situation. You're spending so much time trying to like whack them away and not feel them, that that's all that your mental space is occupied with doing. But as soon as you turn that struggle switch off and start to give yourself time to actually acknowledge what you're feeling, start to think about why you're feeling it, recognize that it's not a pleasant feeling, but it's also not the end of the day, like the world's not going to end, then you can start to challenge it, which is where ACT comes in, which Haroon is going to go through in some more detail. You currently have no sound, Haroon.
Hear me now? Perfect.
Yes.
Sorry, I was on mute. So we've just gone through now in terms of what imposter syndrome is, and kind of a bit, Holly's just introduced ACT, so kind of quite aptly named ACT. So how can we combat imposter syndrome is by acting upon it. Shihab, could I have the next slide, please? Sorry. Next slide. Okay, perfect. Let's the slide, Peter. Leave the slide. So as Holly's mentioned, there's 6 different steps within ACT. So as Holly mentioned, great analogy of quicksand. So in essence, if you're in quicksand, if you seen like old movies or wherever, if there's quicksand, the more you struggle, the quicker you sink. So flat, it will kind of, and stop resisting will kind of make it easier, so you won't sink so quickly. And kind of with ACT is, as hard as it is to do so, is we have to confront what we're, confront our feelings of imposter syndrome. It's okay. Someone mentioned in the comments how is there anyone in their society in our society now, how is there anyone who doesn't have imposter syndrome to some extent? Well, as in that's actually a valid point, because everyone's dealing with their own kind of insecurities or baggage. And like, I've, even before coming on now, like, I feel qualified, just as Shihab said, I might have more experience, I might be older, I still don't feel it, but I've just got to accept that, you know what, I may not be, I might not have done PhDs or whatever, but I'm pretty sure that I can give a pretty good go at this. And, you know, if we don't, it's like the analogy, if you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So accepting that, you know, we're going to have to give it a go, and kind of shifting to a more positivist mindset, which is a bit hard to do in kind of today's day and age. And then we move on to this concept of cognitive diffusion, basically changing how we react to certain situations. So as you can see in the picture there, I'm not sure how clear it is, you know, how we process or how we kind of view our thoughts has a massive impact on how we view our lens on the world. So thinking something of, so let's do a simple exercise together, everyone. So if everyone kind of, if you hold in your mind this kind of negative self-judgment, saying that, for example, I am incompetent or I'm stupid, and just kind of play that in your minds, the more you hear it, the more you start to believe it. It's kind of that negative reinforcement. Now, if I say to you, now that we have this kind of phrase, I am stupid, for example, just say that, putting the words, I'm having the thought that I am stupid. Now, saying that a few times, as stupid as it might sound, ironically, it actually works quite well, because you're starting to distance yourself from it, in essence, that you're not so bound and kind of believing that you are stupid. You're just saying that you're having that thought, and just acknowledging it, you know, it doesn't necessarily make it true. It's just, you know, you're just noticing that you know, it's okay, everyone has negative thoughts, and that's kind of the purpose of actors, confronting it. And kind of we then move on to this kind of being present and being in the moment. So being aware of what's happening in the here and now. Now, as strange as that might sound, you might be thinking, what does that mean? I'm present, I'm here right now. If you have something small to eat, you know, I don't know, grab a raisin or something like that. Now, if you have something small as a raisin, or even just kind of linking it back to science. So I have a tube of Pringles here. If I have a Pringle, I'm not going to demonstrate it live, but if I had a Pringle right now, and the Pringle is covered in this kind of its flavoring, so I've got paprika here, and if I kind of focused on that flavor, you know, focus on that flavor and that texture, you're kind of focusing on that, then you can kind of, you're concentrating on the fact that, you know, you're eating this crisp, but you're also focusing on kind of the sensation in your mouth and, you know, the taste or whatever, but also kind of what's around, because you're focusing on that. And it's sometimes important to kind of, sometimes when we're experiencing imposter syndrome, we're just kind of focused on the negative, that, you know, we can't do it. We're not kind of taking into consideration everything else about us. Could you go to the next slide, please? So, next slide, please, Shihab. Oh, it's probably a bit slow. Yeah, perfect. So, yeah. So moving on to this concept of self as a context. So kind of, you're more than just whatever your experiences are. You know, there's more to you than kind of meets the eye. Like, you know, it's that the whole purpose of ACT is kind of, it analyzes, it's quite, in terms of its evidence base, is kind of rooted in language and how the impact of language is, and kind of, it has on the slide boiling water and boiling egg thing, but that if you ripping this off Kung Fu Panda really, but if you boil water, so you have boiling hot water, you can't change it. Imagine that's the environment. You can either put an egg in, and, you know, an egg to begin with, if you crack it, it's kind of runny or whatever, but you put the egg in the boiling hot water, it becomes quite hard, and, you know, that's the and then if you put rice into it, you know, it originally is quite hard, but then it becomes softened up. It's just a case of how we respond to different things. And so kind of, we're just looking at it in terms of how are we managing the situation, and kind of moving on to our values, what, you know, the values that we hold dear to us or wherever will kind of have an impact again on how we view the world. And because as ACT is all about, kind of, ACT works by kind of dealing with imposter syndrome, not by it's just a side project, because it's all about changing that mindset from what a negative way of thinking, and holding what we what we're holding dear to it. And kind of with imposter syndrome, it's commitment. Commitment is needed. That's kind of the big thing within ACT, is that it's a marathon, not a sprint. We can't go to bed tonight saying that, you know what, I've committed to ACT. I'm gonna go to sleep, wake up in the morning, suddenly, wow, I don't have imposter syndrome anymore. That doesn't happen. It's kind of giving ourselves time, developing that self-awareness to kind of allow us to improve. Could you go on to the next sheet, please? The next slide, sorry. Yeah. So now that we've got a good framework, ACT's got a good framework. So we've got acceptance, changing our way, diffusing that kind of cognitive thinking, and then kind of being present in the moment, being aware of the here and now, what's going on, and kind of being aware of that experiences and how are we going to respond to the situation. That's a good thing. That's a good mantra for kind of life in general. But kind of in the short term, what we can do is separate our facts from feelings. So just because you feel like you don't have, just because you feel like you don't have anything to offer or you don't know much about it, doesn't mean that you can't do it. So for example, delivering this presentation, like Shihab might have felt that he couldn't do this, he didn't know much about it, whatever, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. You're all bright, intelligent people who can definitely do amazing things. Especially put your mind to it, just believing that yourself. That simple thing is believing yourself, and kind of celebrating your successes is a massive thing. It's something that in my time over the years, I've really kind of harbored on to, in terms of celebrating my success, using platforms like LinkedIn. So I've told my committee, get LinkedIn, put your achievements down, show there's more to you than you think. Because I promise you, doing something, even writing down like a brag list, that will mean, having that brag list will mean that you'll celebrate, you'll show what is it about you, that's I guarantee if you think that you don't do anything, writing down a list, you'll find that you'll do X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And then, moving on to that positive self-talk, as mentioned, it was a growth. This is a growth mindset. It's not having that fixed mindset. We kind of move in. We have that kind of inner critic within ourselves, but we need to kind of grow that inner positive voice, saying, I need to believe in abilities. Well, if we may not be so good at something, so for example, I'm not particularly great at basketball, but doesn't mean that I can't get better at it. That sort of mindset. Shihab, can you go to the next slide, please? Probably a lag. Next slide, please. Okay, cool. So now we're going into accepting mistakes and reflecting learning. We all think we're all this kind of, that inner critical voice that I mentioned. We harbor on, we make a mistake once, we'll just keep replaying that event over again and again and again. If we're going to do that, why don't we just utilize it? We accept our mistakes. No one's perfect. We're human after all. We have to look at our mistakes, reflect on. It's a learning opportunity. If you're a current medical student or a doctor watching this or other professional, you'll know reflection is something massive that we have to do. And there's a reason for it, because we we look at the bad situation, we take the good from it, and what can we do to improve? And even if you're an aspiring medical student or any a university student, it's still something that you can take in your day-to-day life. Something may not have gone so well. So if you applied to relationships or whatever, you broke up with someone, or something happened, or something went wrong, what can we do? Looking back and reflecting. And then the next point is really, really important: establishing a support network. It's all great, having that one person, having this positive mindset, but over time, you're probably going to wane a bit. Having others around you that will support you and nurture you will be really, really beneficial to you and help you grow. So, for example, family, families are great things, friends, etc., etc. That's really helpful. Some Beth's mentioned about a compliment log. Fantastic idea. That's something that we can put in. Having that, making that down, and then moving on to rewriting the rules. Rewriting the rules. Change the mindset. Actually, no one's ever going to know the answer. No one's ever going to know the answer to everything. Like if you go into biology class or medicine, there's many times that I've been on the wards and the consultants ask me, do you know what should this be? And I've had absolutely no clue. It's okay. No one has to know everything. That's why, it's a learning process. Every day we're learning. And, as Maiar said in the first, in one of the original slides, what we know compared to other people is pretty much roughly the same. It's just that we might know different bits compared to each other. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay, perfect. So developing a new script. So often when, as I mentioned, we have flashbacks to things that we have, imposters, or, not doing this, or why should I do this? Why am I doing this? I don't deserve to be here, or whatever. But, it's okay to feel lost. If anything, it's normal, it's human. Even doing this right now, lost, you may believe it, you may not believe it, we're just kind of going with how it is. And it kind of leads me on to that last point of faking it till you make it. Don't wait to be kind of super confident or whatever. Life will pass you by. Take it, the here and now. So, for example, as Shihab mentioned about I wanted the first 2 students. So it was another conference thing. I said, I want the first 2 students. Taking that leap of faith and then just kind of rolling with it. Sometimes it really works out. There's been many times in my life, and you'll realize that it'll lead to one thing to another. And, you'll just go on and improve. So, for example, we're all doing this now, we've never really worked together before. This is a great opportunity. We work, we learn, and, carrying on afterwards. And, rewarding ourselves up, reward yourself, breaking that cycle of kind of, so for example, after this, I'm sure Shihab's going to be, I keep going back to him, but, it's the personal example that was given. So apologies for this. But, going back, he's doing a fantastic job. I can definitely say right now, live to all of you, fantastic job done by both him, Holly, and Maiar. I'm really impressed, especially kind of Maiar and Shihab, who are in first year, who may not have so much experience. Holly's doing a fantastic job with the conference anyway, she's amazing. But, this is it. Like, how many times do we hear other people kind of complimenting us? We might say, oh yeah, well done, or, that's it, good. Keep on going, reinforcing like that. It's all about positive reinforcement rather than negative. And yeah, as I said, fake it till you make it. Courage comes from taking risks. Change your behavior first, and then confidence will come to build. Because eventually, everyone works their way around things. Like, just in general, just before I kind of conclude, there's just a point. So when it comes to applying for jobs, women will never apply for a job until they feel that they meet 90% of the person specification, whereas men, they will apply if they meet 40 to 50%, and they tend to be more successful. So kind of this comparison, feeling that you have to meet all the criteria. You never, no one will ever be 100% perfect. There is definitely qualities about you that we can definitely meet out, and you've got to take that leap of faith, because if you don't, you're really kind of you're all regretting what you've missed. And going on to the final slide now. So I'm just I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Shihab, can you go to the last slide? So I want to say on behalf of the rest of the team, thank you very much for listening. I'm going to leave you with this quote from Marie Folio. So be humble. Someone mentioned about kind of confidence. Someone mentioned about confidence earlier. There's a fine line between overconfidence and arrogance. Sometimes, being confident, believing that you can do it, it's great. Feeling that we know better than everyone else, that's when that's what kind of locks us off into a fixed mindset rather than a growth one. And as the quote says, knowing something doesn't make you a fraud, it makes you a student. And every day we're learning as well. So let's kind of take that away and kind of move forward really to kind of really combat this imposter syndrome. So that's everything, and there's our details on the slide as well if you want to kind of get in touch with the society and we can help you.
Yeah, I've only just.
Did you want to leave questions?
Yeah, I was going to say I've only just thought of it, but I've just really quickly, which might have been why I was putting some interesting faces at the camera, created a really quick Google form for feedback. It would be really, really helpful for us if you could fill that in really quickly. It's literally 3 questions, so it should take a very short amount of time. So yeah, and if anyone had any questions, please go now. Haroon, I put the thing on Slack. Could you just proof it for me real quick?
Okay, I'll have a quick look at it. No problem.
If you guys don't have any questions, then you can put like
feedback.
suggestions of how you felt or what you can encourage other people who feel the same way to do. That would be really helpful because there are some really interesting suggestions that I've read earlier.
What your guys' experience with it has been, if you think there should be more teaching on it at med school. Actually, if you had any teaching on it at med school, that would also be really interesting to know. And this is the link to the Google form that I've just shared. So yeah, that would be really, really helpful for us. Oh yeah, I absolutely agree, Arshad. And I think that the point you made earlier about whether or not you can ever really completely cut it out as a thought process was really interesting, because I think so much of it comes down to just continually challenging that idea. And actually, I think the more experience that we have and see the positive contributions we've been able to make, the easier it will become to start to combat those negative thoughts.
Yeah, I think freshers, as Beth mentioned in the chat, should definitely be made aware of this, because many people look back and they regret not taking opportunities they had because they felt like they're fraudulent or not good enough compared to other people around them.
Yeah, I could definitely say.
Yeah.
Sorry, Holly, do you want to go?
No, you go.
I can definitely say,
You go.
considering I've been at medical school for 6 years now, I did nothing in year 1, year 2, year 3, and then all of a sudden in year 4, I just decided to say, you know what, this is it. You know, I'm running out of time now. Let's do this. And you know, I think imposter syndrome was something that really holding me back previously, and I know many people I've spoken to kind of having someone to talk to is really helpful. So having a mentor. I've coached a few kind of younger years students that you go turn to and saying that, you know, they feel as though they're suffering imposter syndrome. They don't deserve to be there. They don't know enough. You know, it's like medicine is all about how long is a piece of string. You can never be like, you know, you might see TV shows like House, who happens to know everything, and you see the American ones where they pull out the most obscure diagnoses that, you know, you've ever seen. That's more kind of for that's more for theatrics. Realistically, on the everyday wards, you'll see things like asthma, COPD, all the rest of it. It's not kind of other things. Yeah. Sorry, Holly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's also really important to note that I know that for me, when I first started med school, I was absolutely terrified because I'd missed my grades and I'd got in because I was from a contextual school. So I had a reduced offer anyway. And I was literally terrified. I was like, everyone's going to know so much. Like, people have got straight A stars. They were from these really good schools. And yeah, it's just not something that's discussed, and it affects so many people. And probably more as universities become more diverse and less elite, because those receiving contextual offers is going up. Also, thank you to everyone who's filled out our feedback form. Really appreciate it.
There's a question in the chat from Yeming, if you want to read that out, Holly.
Would the imposter syndrome lead to other mental health problems? I think it definitely can do. I think anxiety is a really big one.
Yeah, I read that it's quite linked to depression and anxiety, as well as mental exhaustion and confidence.
Yeah,
definitely.
and
yeah. And with ACT anyway, you can use it. ACT isn't just for imposter syndrome. It's actually a proven thing for other things like anxiety, depression, and so on. And so, you know, the negative feelings, kind of being overwhelmed, that's kind of the purpose of ACT, is to kind of confront those feelings. But, you know, you're changing your mindset, and kind of by default, you know, as a byproduct of using ACT, then you'll kind of shift these feelings of imposter syndrome. The elements of it are seen in kind of mental health kind of treatments for anxiety, such as DBT. So, yeah.
I think also Alex has mentioned quite a few things about his friend who's suffering from imposter syndrome. So I personally wanted to reply to that and say that I personally think the main thing with imposter syndrome is that you're quite worried about the people around you, and you're not just concerned with yourself. You're quite worried about how they'd view you. You're quite worried about how they are compared to you. Like they're much higher. Well, in reality, just take the chance, because if you do, at least there is the chance of you actually succeeding. Well, if you don't take it, it's gone. So at least you put that very, very tiny percentage of you getting in or going through it, if that makes sense.
And also, you just being there and continually reinforcing the positives that you can see them achieving, and all the little bits that they wouldn't necessarily notice themselves because you're not necessarily in a place to acknowledge the positives is really good.